Good evening, it's 6 o'clock and it's Bev in for Michelle tonight. First up, have you noticed those amazing loyalty club deals at the supermarket recently? Well, one that caught my eye was for a bottle of Baileys at Sainsbury's for nearly 22 quid or only £13 if you're a Nectar Club member. Why? Well, because these schemes are selling your data. I want to know if you're OK with that. Are we all blindly walking into a digital future without really knowing what it means? Also tonight, who do you trust to build more houses? In 2019, this government promised to build 300,000 new properties per year, but they have yet to hit that target. Now, they're going to let local councils off the hook from these targets. Why? Could it possibly be so that Conservative MPs can win over their NIMBY constituents before an election? And what has happened to university students? Even the very brightest, those at Oxford and Cambridge, are being allowed time off and the use of tech to write essays because they cannot cope with the demands of their courses. Why do they feel like this now? I want to hear from you, of course, as always. But also, we're going to tackle a lot more topics with two fantastic guests this evening. We've got, first, though, the news with Polly Middlehurst.
Bev, thank you, and good evening to you. Well, police are appealing for help to find a missing mother of three in Norfolk. Footage has been released of Gaynor Lord, who was last seen on CCTV in Norwich on Friday. Police are hoping this video, if you're watching on TV, of the 55-year-old may jog the memory of some of the passers-by. Her coat has been discovered in the River Wensum. That runs through the park, and police are saying it is likely she may have entered the water. And underwater teams have today, we know, been searching the area.
We are continuing the work that we have been doing since Friday night here at Wensum Park, conducting searches both on land and in the water. Today we've been joined by a specialist dive team who are in the water now, and they're supporting the search in terms of getting into those deeper parts of the River Wensum, which then obviously supports all of the search work that we've already done here at the river.
Tory infighting was the focus of today's Christmas-themed Prime Minister's questions, the final session of the year as well. 38 rebel Conservative MPs choosing to abstain last night from a vote on the Safety of Rwanda bill. It passed, though, with a majority of 44. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, took aim, accusing the government of being in meltdown. But Rishi Sunak hit back, saying the numbers on migration and the economy speak for themselves.
Down by a third, and crucially, as we heard from Honourable Friend, tax cuts coming to help working families in the new year.
Mr. Speaker, he can spin it all he likes, but the whole country can see that yet again the Tory party is in meltdown and everyone else is paying the price. Now, he's kicked the can down the road. But in the last week, his MPs have said of him he's not capable enough, he's inexperienced, he's arrogant, a really bad politician.
Well, last night's result was a welcome victory for the Prime Minister, but some Conservatives have warned they'll still vote against the third reading of the draft Rwanda law in the new year unless it's significantly amended. They're saying it's because they want to ensure asylum seekers can be deported to the East African nation before the next election. The former Immigration Minister Robert Jenrick, who resigned last week over the bill, was among those to abstain last night.
Well, the public expect us to secure our borders, so I'll always fight for that. And I'm pleased that it sounds as if there's a way forward where we can make the bill better.
And are you going to be able to persuade the Prime Minister to change the bill at all?
Well, I certainly hope so. He shares my determination to fight this issue. Illegal migration is one of the great scourges of our time. It's doing untold damage to our country, and we're determined to tackle it.
A man who strangled a pensioner to death and went on a spending spree with her savings has been jailed for at least 31 years. 71-year-old Susan Hawkey was tortured in her northwest London home by 24-year-old Zaire Howard. He forced her to give up her bank card's PIN number, and then he and his girlfriend, Chelsea Grant, then spent £13,000 of her money just hours later on luxury goods. Grant has been jailed for 15 years. Greater Manchester has scrapped a controversial scheme for a clean air zone. The Mayor, Andy Burnham, is promising drivers won't have to pay to use roads as he unveils alternative plans to control air pollution in the city. Instead, leaders say investment in buses and taxis will bring clean air to the region much faster than charging drivers. Just over £50 million is earmarked for electric buses and £30 million in grants for cleaner taxis. City leaders have pledged to achieve air pollution targets by 2025. That's a full year earlier than planned. That's the news from GB News across the UK on TV, in your car, on digital radio and on your smart speaker by saying play GB News. This is Britain's News Channel.
Good evening, welcome to Dewbs & Co. It's me, Bev Turner. Tonight, my panel are here with me, which is just as well, because I've been talking for 2.5 hours this morning and I might have dried up with what to say tonight. Conservative Life peer and former MEP Jacqueline Foster is here, and former editor of Labourist Peter Edwards. I want to hear from you as well this evening. Get in touch with me on email, gbviews@gbnews.com, or on Twitter, now known as X, but I think for me it will always be Twitter, @GBNews. OK. First up, have you got a Nectar card? Well, if you do, Sainsbury's have just sold your data to the tune of £300 million, and Tesco, well, they do the same things. You might have noticed these mega deals for club card members. Now, none of this is against the law, but should it be? Are you OK with your data being sold in this way? Do you think we need new data protection laws? Peter, let me come to you. You look like a man who enjoys a club card.
I don't know how to take that. A man who enjoys a club card.
Maybe you like a discount. We all like a discount.
Doesn't everyone?
We all love a discount. And isn't it the case at the moment, you will have seen it as well, the price differences in supermarkets at the moment are phenomenal. Like the example that I used just before the news is the fact that you can get a bottle of Baileys, I think it was for about 33 quid without the card, and it was nearly half that price with a card. Here we go, let me find my figures. £13 if you got a Nectar card, or £22 if you didn't have one at Sainsbury's. Now, do people know why these discounts are so huge? Do we need more awareness of what these companies then do with our data once we've registered?
Well, the data is another point we'll come to, but I think on the pricing, just, you know, we're all shoppers, we're all consumers in one form. We can see why they're doing it, which is if on the face of it, there's a big quote-unquote discount, then the customer, which is us, feels like it's a good deal. Now, as I understand it, there are quite strict rules about how you define a discount. So a product has to be available at the higher rate for X number of days. It may be 28 days or so before the discount kicks in, i.e. you can't double the price for a tin of beans yesterday and then halve it today and claim that's a discount. So there are already some rules against that. But we know, and as you said in your intro, supermarkets are acting legally, but there's now a much bigger differential between the ordinary price and the loyalty card price, like a Nectar or Tesco club card. On the data, which again, I think will be a bit controversial. Again, there's no suggestion Sainsbury have broken the law, and I've got a lot of sympathy for Sainsbury in some respects, and I think they generally have good customer service. People try to help you. They're quite transparent with their pricing. Certainly, we've all had bad experiences in supermarkets, and I haven't had those particularly in Sainsbury, but I think a lot of folk will feel uncomfortable at data being sold, because if it's being sold for 300 million, then even if it's anonymised, it implies that it's quite valuable to someone. But
we don't know enough about it, though, Peter. We don't know that this is happening. When we sign up to these loyalty schemes, do you think it explicitly says in big enough letters, the reason we're giving you this massive discount and effectively manipulating you into joining our club card scheme is because we're then going to take your data, we're going to sell it to advertisers, you're going to be bombarded with stuff that you might not want?
I don't think manipulating it is a fair word. It's up to all of us, whether we're moving house, a big expense, or a smaller contractual arrangement like signing up for a club card, to read the small print. And I suspect, like...
Have you seen how long the small print is, Jacqueline? I mean, when you get the terms and conditions, we just tick the box, don't we? And we just presume that they're going to be... We trust them.
Yeah, I mean, I think Sainsbury is one of the brands I've got a bit more trust in. There are others, and I'm not going to list them all, but others who I have an extremely negative view on. But ultimately, it is down to us, because it's a trade-off between saving a little bit of money, which kind of, compared to 10 years ago, all our weekly shopping is much more painful, financially saving a little bit of money versus what we're signing away.
Jacqueline, I always find it fascinating when I hear people who would deem themselves to be on the political left, what that even means anymore, kind of trusting in huge corporations and advocating for this sort of system.
Well, I'm not advocating for it, but I'm saying...
But you're defending Sainsbury's for pulling the wool over our eyes. Or the
well, why do you use that phrase, pulling the wool over our eyes, if they're acting within the law?
Because maybe this is the point, isn't it? Maybe as consumers, we need to feel that we are making these decisions with absolute informed consent about where our data goes, Jacqueline.
Well, I think this is now... You can't put the genie back in the bottle. This isn't just about supermarkets. If you've got travel insurance and you've got health insurance and you've got home insurance, you will find that all of these companies and building societies too, in the T&Cs, very often it will say, by the time you find it, that some of the information, not all of it, will be sold to third parties. They will have access to it. So it's been around for a long time. In terms of when you look at the loyalty cards, I have no issue at all. I am a free marketeer and I'm going to choose, if I've got a Sainsbury's or whoever it might be near me, then as a shopper, I want to get the best deal I can. If I want a loyalty card, I accept that there will be, again, some information that will go towards a third party, but there's not a great deal of personal information that they take off you to get that card, actually, because, funnily enough, I only recently got one. Probably should have got it years ago, because,
But that's my point. But presumably, you got that because you're shopping and seeing the massive difference in prices.
Yeah, I saw on some items, I saw that there was quite considerable discount.
Massive.
Well, that's fine. I mean, people go to wholesalers and they get cards to go to wholesalers because they know that they'll get a discount. So I haven't got a huge issue with this at all. It's widespread. It's not just the supermarkets. What I do believe where the responsibility lies with companies is to ensure in the T&Cs, in those terms and conditions, that at the top of the page, it does say to people, you know, you have a choice, you can sign up for this, but do be aware that some of the information that you give us you know, will be sold on to third parties.
But you see, with those differences in prices, people can't afford not to sign up. I mean, another example, I gave you the bottle of Baileys, but the other example, a kilo of beef sold at £14.88, 15 quid for a joint of beef, or £7 with a loyalty card. So there is no choice. That's not a choice. You have to hand over your data.
Well, I'm sorry, but you might be able to go to the supermarket next door and get it for 7 quid anyway. I think it's about consumer choice and it's about looking around, and I think people do shop quite... I think people are pretty savvy, actually.
But if they can sell it next door for 7 quid, why can't Sainsbury's sell it for 7 quid and not buy your data?
I don't know. I mean, you know, I'm not an expert in the retail trade market, but as a shopper, you know, sometimes you'll go somewhere and it may be a bit more expensive, but you know that you can guarantee the quality. So it's not always just that price that's on something for a shopper. What you want to do, if I'm buying food, for example, I want to make sure I can eat all of that food. I don't want to really go and pay and buy something and then find you cook this food and it's actually pretty awful or pretty hit and miss.
Yeah.
So it's not then good value for money.
I think this issue, Peter, though, about how beholden we are to tech now, it ties into this other story recently, which was about this UK government have said that we're at high risk of a catastrophic ransomware attack that could bring the country to a standstill. This damning report, Joint Committee National Security Strategy, has said that we're... And I will predict now, and I don't mind saying on the TV, that in 2024, I think the next pandemic is going to be a massive cyber attack that will probably bring down most of our services that we are now rely on. We rely on them. And I think the way out of that is going to be you have to load up your biometric digital ID and then you can get back on the internet. But I feel like the British public don't have enough awareness of this. Are you frightened by the idea of a catastrophic ransomware attack, the virus to beat all viruses?
We've got to speak responsibly, and we've got to be ensure that everyone watching and all of us as individuals are resilient and aware of the risks without triggering alarm. So, of course, there are attempted cyber attacks on Britain all the time, whether they're small companies and charities because they're seen as easy, big companies because they're seen as rich, or the NHS in recent years as well. I think what we're hearing, and it's not going to be top 3 issue on the doorstep going to general election. What we heard a lot more from the government the last couple of weeks is about resilience. Oliver Dowden, the de facto Deputy Prime Minister, gave a statement a week or 2 ago on a very similar point. I was struck by this report because we know there's a major economy and we're not in a very good relationship with Russia because of the evil actions of Vladimir Putin, that we're going to be a target. I was very struck in this report by an independent House of Commons committee, so they're not from the left-right debate, Jackie and I. It said the former Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, had not made cyber attacks a priority. Now, we hope nothing bad happens, but that does look like a pretty big misstep.
But when you say we've got to be resilient, I mean, Oliver Dowden was saying you should really have candles in your house because of a cyber attack. And Jacqueline, I just thought, what have we become in this move to strive towards a technological future? We've actually been risking being a medieval country where our houses are colder and you can't turn the lights on. No, make it make sense to me, Jacqueline.
I can't stand knee-jerk and messages that go out that alarm the public, and they do not need to be alarmed. Of course we need to be aware. And in recent years, actually, I think government, to be fair, and I criticise my own government from time to time, people know this watching this show, you know, they've invested about £2.5 billion on trying to deal with this. We have had a couple of examples of this, and this was a local authority, I think, 4 years ago, and they were attacked. And we know that the NHS data at times is under attack.
That's right.
I do not believe that we are totally unprepared. We invest heavily in this. We're extremely good in this. I mean, we're quite world-leading in certain areas on cyber attack. I mean, we have GCHQ and we have other bodies in this country. And don't forget, we're part of the Five Eyes, which is obviously with America, New Zealand, Australia, Canada. We are preeminent in intelligence. So I think we do everything that we can to try and mitigate it. That does not mean to say something can't happen. But then you look at the number of times that they will have managed to block this. And we don't hear about that, but they are very successful at doing it. So you're quite right, Bev. Of course, you've always got to be aware. And we ourselves, I think the banks have done rather well in recent years, and some other organisations where they are trying to say, don't get caught in with an email here, or because it all boils into fraud and all of this sort of stuff and people being caught out. So no, I'm not a knee-jerker. We will obviously do everything we can, and we have to take personal responsibility to make sure that we don't get caught out. But I do think government, you know, party politics aside, I think government, they are on it. Doesn't mean to say something can't get through. It's not just Russia. It's also China. It's also other countries as well. We know that we are targeted, and so is the West generally. And so I just think we just need to be aware and then carry on and enjoy our lives.
Well, look what you've been saying at home. Trevor said, I've got a Nectar card. I got £137 since last Christmas. I don't care who gets my data. I just buy where and what I want. And Simon says, Tesco started all this off first. Their television advert showed a lady going around zapping different products with a club card. They grossly inflated the cost of all their products. But if you just happen to have a club card, you can buy the product at the original price. And then they call it a discount. That's my point. Exactly. And Carl, beautiful. It is discrimination against anyone who doesn't want to have a card like me. Exactly. And Sharon has said the small print have about 20 conditions, plus you need a magnifying glass to read the terms and conditions, so tick that box to say, no, you cannot sell my data. Keep your emails coming in, gbnews@gbnews.com. OK, moving on. A parliamentary report has said that the UK is at high risk of a catastrophic ransomware attack. Just mention that. We're going to be discussing it a little bit more in just a moment. Are we prepared for 21st century warfare?
Earlier on GB News Radio.
Now, the Prime Minister, Rishi Sunak, was victorious last night. He saw off a potential rebellion by his own MPs. The Rwanda bill passed through the Commons with a majority of 44.
Yes, Home Secretary James Cleverly has insisted the government's Rwanda bill will not be killed by Tory rebels, in spite of right-wing Conservative MPs saying they could vote the legislation down at later stages. The bill might see amendments in the new year, and of course will go through the ever-tricky stage of committees.
Yes, it will indeed. Labour voted against the bill with a commitment to scrap the whole plan altogether if they win the next election. Critics argue that the millions allocated to Rwanda could be more effectively used to combat people smuggling gangs. So, the question, has Rishi won the battle only to potentially lose the war?
Well, joining us now is our political editor, Christopher Hope. And, Chris, this is perhaps surprising to many, the degree by which Rishi Sunak won last night. But I suppose the real challenge comes in the new year.
That's right, Tom and Emily. Hello there from College Green in London here in Westminster. Yeah, definitely right. Now we're seeing the shape now of the deal to be done with those right-wing Tories to ensure that they stay on board with this bill when it comes back in the second or third week of January. The PM spokesman has just told journalists the following. They look forward that the government is clear that any amendments must be done in a way that is legally credible, has the deterrent effect of stopping making sure that the flights can take off in the first place, and ensure the scheme doesn't collapse. Those are 3 red lines the government has now told the right. If you can put amendments down, but they must hit those 3 targets. That is narrowing the scope for amendments quite dramatically. This is the day after, of course, the big win by the government overnight, the 44 MP majority, far bigger than expected. And this is what's happened. The whips are now going to put the bite on those 29 Tory MPs who chose to abstain, pending further amendments, and said, well, look, it's a very, very tight space to work here. You may not get what you want. And that is fascinating. Also, just while I'm on, we've been talking to the chief spokesman for the Labour Party, that what happens if Rwanda flights do take off. And Geoffrey Cox told this programme over an hour ago, 2 hours ago, forgive me now, that he thinks is a better than evens chance that flights take off in May now, given the majority last night. I asked the spokesman for Labour what will happen if the flights take off, if it's starting to work. They said they would repeal it even if it's successful. That's fascinating. They see the problem they've got with it is it's a deportation plan, not an offshore processing plan. So the heart of it is not necessarily if it's successful. They don't like the idea of deporting people from here to be processed in Rwanda.
Good evening, it's Bev. Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, this evening, keeping me company until 7 o'clock. Conservative Life peer and former MEP, Jacqueline Foster, and former editor of Labourist, Peter Edwards. Now, we discussed this a little bit, we touched upon it before the break, but I am interested to dig into it a little bit more because a parliamentary committee said that Britain is vulnerable to cyber and ransomware attacks because of poor planning and a lack of investment. Do you think most people even know what a ransomware attack is, Jacqueline? I'm not sure I'm entirely sure what a ransomware attack is.
No, I don't think people do. People are aware that we are having things like cyber attacks. We hear things like, for example, you know, somebody has infiltrated somebody's computer system, and particularly if it's a government organisation, we'll tend to hear about it on the news and stuff. And of course, I think as this has become far more sophisticated and we know where the sort of enemies are, I do think that they're having to ratchet it up. They've had to ratchet this up, really, I think, over the last 2 or 3 years because it's become more apparent.
I'm just looking at some of those examples, Peter. So we had the Sellafield nuclear site was hacked by groups linked to Russia and China. And there was also an NHS, nearly 1 million NHS patients' details compromised after cyber-attacking ransomware on the University of Manchester affected an NHS patient data set. Now, this is what worries me. And I understand, and I'm not a complete Luddite, and I know we have to move with the times, and I understand there are many ways in which the digital world helps organise humanity. I get that. But I also think it renders us incredibly vulnerable, and that kind of keeps me awake at night.
Well, I think there are a couple of changes, and by the way, I've been to Sellafield, and there aren't great tubs of green goo to stare into. It feels relatively secure. I went as a trainee reporter, but obviously there was an issue alluded to. Obviously that's completely different to a leak. Again, we don't want to put the wind up people.
Yeah.
But I think, first of all, it used to be, in the 70s, 80s, it was just criminals that wanted to do nasty things to us. We've all heard of Brinksmat, robberies. They'd go into a bank and try and steal your money. It's not just criminals these days. It's what they call foreign nation-states, hostile states, or might be Russian hackers allied to the state, where the state turns a blind eye. And consequently, they've got much more power and incentive to kind of do nasty things to British corporations or public bodies. And I think the other one, as you alluded to earlier, is all our kind of reliance on technology as part of our lives. And I'll give you one example, which, you know, again, is... it was nothing sinister, but I was on a train the other day and it stopped immediately in a station in Waterloo, didn't get anywhere. An announcement said the driver's going to reboot the train. I didn't know you could reboot a train.
Turn it on and off again.
You know, I do that to my computer, but, you know, the lights went off and the digital display went black and you heard a kind of rumbling noise, which and then the train was rebooted and, I mean, we still got kicked off anyway. Yeah. But it shows to lay people like me how key parts of British infrastructure rely on IT and internet security.
You're on an Armed Forces Committee, aren't you, Jacqueline? So you probably hear the other side of this. And should I be able to sleep at night and think that this country has got us protected in this area?
Yes, I think you should. I am. And I'm not blasé about these things. Sellafield actually was in my region when I was a member of the European Parliament. We know, of course, that these sorts of places are going to be targets for foreign hostile countries. But no, we're very fortunate actually, because we do meet the heads, you know, the chiefs of staff in all the forces, and so we do get information which is not really viable really to put out into the public arena. But we are very good at what we do, and I mean there are those in all of the forces, whether it's the RAF or the Royal Navy or the Army, actually, and the way they all work together, certainly to deal with these sort of hostile forces and these, you know, attacks that they try and deal with cyber is phenomenal. So I don't lose any sleep at all. As I said, I'd never take anything for granted, but I certainly think we have the personnel and I think we have the wherewithal, and I think that they are at the top of their game.
Peter, I'm not sure we'd be any safer hands if Keir Starmer was in number 10. Do you think he understands enough about this sort of digital landscape?
Well, look, I don't want to make everything party political. I think Keir Starmer is a serious guy. He was a barrister. He showed, whether you agree with his policies or not, he showed he's hardworking, on top of the detail, and he's truthful and he's rigorous. So I think all those things really matter. But look, let's try and put party politics aside. This work in government, obviously, it will be led by ministers, but lots of the detail, and this is one of the most complex areas, will be delivered by civil servants and maybe specialists who are hired from the private sector to work as part of government. And of all the things that come up, you know, in back and forth of politics, this is one of the most sensitive and specialist areas. And I think it's about supporting the civil service rather than undermining them and getting the skill set in. We know when civil servants have taken a bit of a battering from some politicians.
Do you think maybe, I mean, one of the criticisms from this committee was that Suella Braverman spent a lot of time worrying about, she says she's showed no interest in ransomware, clear political priorities given instead to other issues such as illegal migration and small boats.
Well, that's a great point, and I think you know, people like me or the public, we don't feel outraged that Suella Braverman has different views to us because, you know, we're all a mix of different views. The concern about Suella Braverman that she was pursuing pet projects, and a particularly dreadful one in my mind like Rwanda, where we might deal with 28,000 illegal crossings by sending 100 to 200 to Rwanda. So it comes back to that question, same with David Cameron 7, 8, 9 years ago, pre-COVID. Are we dealing with the stuff that really matters and keeps us secure, or are we dealing with the stuff that will titivate and excite certain newspapers?
So you might say, Jacqueline, we've got that covered, the security, the cyber warfare.
I believe it's covered, frankly, and also then to actually then target Suella Braverman. If you're looking at national security and you have thousands of people coming into this country with no paperwork, arriving on the beach at certain times, and we have no idea who they are, where they're from half of the time, I mean, that is national security. And the primary purpose of the government is to clearly try and make sure that you know actually who's coming in, because that is also a massive threat. Of course, you've got cyber security on one side, but you also have to have that physical security as well. And that's why I don't believe that Suella was not focusing on the right things. I think she was focusing on the right things, and we're trying to focus on the right things. And we spent an awful lot of time trying to get through legislation that can try and protect the public, which has been an absolute nightmare. But nevertheless, no, I think that was a bit of a cheap shot, really, to accuse her of that.
But that's not my view. That's the view of the independent committee.
No, if I may say, even if it had been a Labour Home Secretary, I do not believe then that they would be favouring one thing over another thing. I just don't believe that's the case. I think any Home Secretary, whatever party, takes very seriously national security and obviously the threats that are now here today that probably weren't here, you know, 20 or 30 years ago.
Is it just that the public can see and feel a tangible sense of fear of asylum seekers, immigrants, and yet the idea of cyber warfare is just too... we can't picture it.
That's
Peter.
right. Yeah.
I don't have a tangible fear of asylum seekers. That's not irreconcilable with wanting safe and secure borders and a functioning system without backlogs, but I'm not terrified of asylum seekers. I'd imagine the man or woman on the street, we're all worried about crime.
So, OK, well, let's just take it in that direction then, because I think a lot of people, well, we know for a fact that a lot of people are worried about that, Jacqueline. Particularly the protests we've seen about having asylum seeker hotels in people's towns.
Well, because this is the whole point. The primary purpose, I'll repeat again, of a government is to make sure that you are safe and secure, whether it's Bev or whether it's Peter, whether it's me. That's their primary purpose. And if you then have thousands of people coming into this country who are not coming through a legal route, who have not applied for a visa, who are not legitimate, who are coming through with, you know, we've gone over all of this, with these people making millions, as I've said, on the back of misery, because that's actually what it is. And coming in the country, there's no paperwork, we have no idea who they are, and then we know that there have been instances across the country, and it's not sort of trying to, you know, knee-jerk into this. There have been instances across the country, and we have people who have been, you know, they're criminals in the country that they have come from. Then they disappear from wherever, and it's just not good enough. So, of course, not everybody that's coming here is going to be a bad person. But what we do know is that many people have been coming here, and they've been convicted of other things in the countries that they've come from.
OK, right, well, we'll move on. I'm just looking at some of your messages coming in here. I'm going to have a look at a few more of them while we take a quick break, because coming up next is local councils will no longer be forced to set aside greenfield land to meet future housing needs. Are we a nation of NIMBYs? Not in my backyard. Don't go anywhere.
Earlier on GB News Radio.
Let's get cracking with a great show ahead, and of course there's only one place to start again, and that's with Rishi Sunak. And there's been a big development in the last couple of hours regarding that Rwanda bill, because we've learnt that 3 red lines that the Prime Minister has set is set to get out of this controversial legislation over the line. He reckons those red lines will do the job, and I'm joined now by our political editor, Christopher Hope. Christopher, good afternoon to you. So Rishi narrowly avoided that nightmare before Christmas. We're expecting tears in the New Year's, but could these red lines be the solution? If so, could you explain what they are?
Well, that's right. So the Tory right were quelled, and they agreed to abstain because the PM told them that he would look at considering hardening up the legislation with amendments. And that's what they wanted to hear, the right. So the right then, 29 or so Tory MPs chose to abstain on the vote last night, helping the government to quite a meaty 44-seat majority. That's what they need to force the bill through the peers. Now, at lunchtime today, the number has made very clear on the red lines which all amendments must abide by. They must be legally credible, have a deterrent effect on small boats crossings, and they won't collapse the scheme. Now, that's interesting, I think, because the second one is aimed at the Tory left. One big worry for the whips right now is that the Tory left might put in their own amendments to weaken the attempt to disregard elements of human rights legislation, and Labour and others could support it, and that could force the government to rely on the right-wing MPs to stop those amendments getting through. So they're trying to deal in one way with the left, and on the right they're saying it mustn't risk collapsing the scheme. Now, we know the PM has said this deal goes within an inch of collapsing that scheme, they can't go any further. So he's almost saying to the Tory right, this is what you're going to get. And essentially, this is the victorious government imposing red lines on the right wing of the party, which weren't happy, were they, since Monday about this Rwanda bill. It's very hard to see where it goes from here, I think, for them. Elsewhere, Martin, Labour have been talking about their ideas. They've been very clear. I asked them directly, if this Rwanda bill works, will you repeal it? They said yes. So even if the first planes take off as planned in May next year, a Labour government, when it comes in, would accept legislation, stop the treaty, and stop taking people to be processed in Rwanda. They say that's because it's a deportation scheme, not an offshoring scheme. They did hold the door open to agreeing some form of offshore processing centre, but Rwanda is dead if Labour win, even if it's working. Back to you.
OK, thank you for that, Chris. The mood in the Tory party is in the red zone. Will these red lines work? That remains to be seen. Now, if Rishi Sunak thought things couldn't get much worse, then think again.
On Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m, Nigel Farage is back in Britain. The jungle hero returns and he means business. And his popularity is soaring above Rishi Sunak. Would you vote for Nigel to be Prime Minister? Plus, I'll be joined by influential Tory rebel Sir John Hayes. Did the five families bottle it last night in the Rwanda vote? Angela Levin has the latest Harry and Meghan drama. They've been named the biggest losers in Hollywood. And we'll bring you the most exciting pay-per-view anywhere on the telly. Patrick Christie's tonight, 9 till 11 p.m. Be there.
Very good evening. It's Dewbs & Co. with me, Bev Turner, this evening. Keeping me company until 7 o'clock, Conservative Life peer and former MEP Jacqueline Foster and former editor of Labourist Peter Edwards. And guess who's in the building? Let me tell you, when I was going on air tonight, there was frankly nobody making this programme. There was nobody running GB News because everybody was stood around the doorway welcoming Nigel Farage back into the building with his tan and his new svelte figure, and he will be on his show at 7 o'clock tonight. Now, local councils will no longer be forced to set aside greenfield land to meet their future housing needs under a new planning system to be announced by ministers. According to the Centre of Cities, the UK has a backlog of 4.3 million homes. And maybe we are a bit too sentimental about greenbelt land. Are we a nation of NIMBYs? Jacqueline, let me come to you. 2019, the Conservatives promised that they would build 300,000 houses a year. I think, actually, they've not done too badly, I have to say. I mean, in 22 to 23, they built 234,000 houses, which is not that shy of their 300,000. But now, apparently, the councils are being told, you're not going to have to push these houses through. You can leave it up to you make the decisions for yourself. We're not going to hold you to these targets. The cynic in me says that this is because they're hoping that there won't be the local controversies which might stop Conservative MPs winning seats in the next election.
Well, genuinely, I don't think it's just about Conservative members of Parliament at all. It is a NIMBY situation because councillors are elected, whatever party, and you know, they'll have constituents who'll come and see them and they'll say, you know, we need more housing, we need, you know, we've got families and this village and this town's grown. And then, of course, the councils turn around and go, OK, then we've now got a proposition to build 3,000 houses, whatever, and the same people who've been lobbying actually will turn around and say, oh, no, you can't build them here. And I think it's sometimes just a bit between a rock and a hard place. We don't have the same laws in place, the sort of Napoleonic laws that they have in France, where they just basically say, well, we're going to build 3,000 houses, they're so tough, or we're going to put a, you know, high-speed railway line through, so that's tough too. So on the positive side, of course, we need to discuss these things. But there's an awful lot also brownfield sites where they could be cleaned up, they could be actually available for building. But we do need actually the councils to take, I think, they can't keep fobbing off saying, well, it's you know, it's central government, it's central government. Central government can only do so much, but when you get into the whole legal challenges that go on, they're often down at local level. OK, the Secretary of State may have to make a final decision, but it's those on the ground. And I think they've just got to be pretty tough with the public to say, look, we need more housing. And that's the end of it.
What's your position on this, Peter? Because we do need more housing. And it does feel like every time there is a proposal to build a big new housing estate in a lovely area outside of our major cities, suddenly it gets pulled at the last minute because the locals don't want it.
Sometimes that's the case, but we're in a situation where Labour say we should build more houses, the Tories, who are the government, say we should build more houses, all of us, all of you, say we should build more houses, and then so do charities like Shelter as well. This is a charter for not building houses, so that will create a further problem in terms of supply. Others dispute it. I absolutely think supply and demand affects the price, and I think it's daft to deny that. Where I live in London, the average price of a starter home is above 400k. A starter home, well, that used to be someone aged 25.
Yeah.
Now people like to get their starter home and think they'll be lucky to get one before the age of 40. Imagine if you're a single person trying to buy your first home for over 400k. This is a charter for not building houses. Of course, it's down to electoral politics, NIMBYism to a certain extent, although that glosses over a range of issues, and sticky moments with one or two Conservative backbenchers. Of course, this is being said now because we're 12 months or fewer off a general election.
And so, go on, elaborate on that a little bit more. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think it's this issue that, as you and Jacqueline alluded to, that you can have local development can be very unpopular, and Michael Gove, who is a housing secretary, has at times objected to housing developments within his constituency. There's nothing inherently wrong with that, but because MPs have a local role, and I think that's a good thing that MPs have an eye on what's going on in their patch, whether they're red, blue, yellow or SNP. But the point is, we're not building enough houses. That's consistently been the case under Conservatives. There are particular issues around backbenchers in a trade-off between holding their seat and building housing developments. And then presiding over all of this is we reshuffle the housing minister on average once every year. So in 13 years of government, we've had, I can't remember, it's about 13 or 14 housing ministers over 13 years.
Crazy. So how do they get a handle on such a difficult issue when they're only in the job for 5 minutes? There's also, of course, I just wonder, Jacqueline, whether there's enough creativity to this issue as well. We've now got so many offices sitting empty around our cities. Do you think the will is there, whether that is private or public will, to get those properties working for people to live in them?
I think there's a couple of issues. First of all, the elephant in the room is we have probably had 2 or 3 million people come to this country in the last 3 or 4 years. And it's a complete oxymoron. On the one hand, everybody's going, but there's not enough accommodation for anybody that's already here. And at the same time, the left or the Labour Party go, well, no, we don't want the Rwanda scheme and we don't want this scheme and we don't want to try and tighten up illegal immigration, etc., etc. And then you're sort of sitting there and saying, well, what do you want? Because you need to start looking at the reality. If there isn't enough housing for people who are already in this country, that we're trying to obviously deal with all the restrictions that go with that, how can you then have this open-door policy, which is what the left's policy is? So even more and more people come in. But if it can just come to this point, it's not just about house buying, because a lot of people, when I was young, we couldn't buy something initially. We were a bit older and then you're having to save up. I think there are a couple of things. The local authorities do have a responsibility if you're looking at... and housing associations. So we need more social housing stock. So there needs to be more of that, apart from, obviously, the private developers, because, as Peter quite rightly says, if you want to be around London or Greater London area, the costs are huge. But, you know, in the north and in other parts of the country, there are quite reasonable places that you can buy. And it behoves building societies and banks, who are the folk that lend the money, to come up with much more adventurous schemes so they can encourage people onto the
well, let me answer that point
ladder, I think.
about all those points. So the left wants secure borders, and I'll give you one quick example. More than 10 years ago, the Labour Party called for a points-based immigration system. Now the government have adopted that policy.
It's not really working, though, is it?
Jacqueline is a very...
But you've just forgotten one point. Because when we had enlargement in 2004 and 10 countries joined the European Union, all the other countries in the European Union, like Germany, put a 7-year hold on anybody that came into their countries, then accessing immediately benefits, housing and all of those things. Tony Blair's government at that time didn't put the restriction in, and that was what started the ball rolling.
Okay. She's right about
Tony Blair.
We won't take any lectures there.
I haven't given any lectures, but I think Jacqueline's on a sticky wicket. If, first of all, she's going back to events of 10 years ago, then going back to events of 20 years ago, lots of data showed that when the EU was enlarged, people came to work. The reason I say Jacqueline is very clever, because she knows in a country of 60 million people, sending 100, not a million, sending 100 people to Rwanda has literally no impact on housing at all. And Jacqueline, a bit of myth-making, but did challenge me to come up with one solution. So Labour had a policy 7, 8 years ago called Help to Build. So George Osborne had Help to Buy, which pumped up the housing market, forced up prices and allowed for a consumer-led boom, which supported them to win the 2015 general election. It did nothing to tackle supply or house building. At the same time, Labour called for Help to Build, which would be zero borrowing, repeat, zero borrowing, but incentives for banks to lend to individual companies backed by government guarantees. So it's a guarantee system, zero borrowing, build more houses. Right, we've got to take another quick break, I'm afraid. You've sent some brilliant emails in. I promise you I will get to them before the end of the show. But coming up next, as Cambridge University considers adding a reading week in the middle of term, and Oxford University tells their students to write essays via AI. Are we lowering standards at our universities? And what's wrong with this generation that they can't do a proper undergraduate degree without needing a week off? Don't go anywhere.
to Dewbs & Co with me, Bev Turner, this evening. Jacqueline Foster is still with me and Peter Edwards. Now, you've been getting in touch at home. Alex has said, we haven't got a housing crisis, we have an immigration crisis. There's a lot of you saying that. Jeff says, in Basingstoke, we're being buried under new houses. Uncontrolled development is everywhere. And Paul, I love this point. I don't care if there's more housing near me, but where are the new roads? So that I don't have to sit in the traffic that it generates. Just because the cities are ruined, why should the countryside be next? Very good point. Right, our final topic of the evening. We are producing, it seems, a generation of university student snowflakes. Cambridge University, that's right, Cambridge, is considering adding a reading week in the middle of term after campaigners in the student union cited mental health problems associated with Week 5 blues. Meanwhile, students at their rival Oxford University have been told that they can use AI, like a ChatGPT tech, to help them write the first draft of their essays. Peter Edwards, I don't really know where to begin with this story because it makes me worried about the next generation. So tell me why I'm wrong. Tell me why this is all OK.
I had a reading week when I was at university, so in a 10-week term, and I studied literature, so, you know, if you've got a chunky 600 or 800 page novel to get through, having a reading week in the middle is actually pretty ordinary. It's not contentious.
But why have they never needed it in Cambridge until now?
Well, as I understand it, it's not necessarily the word need, because, as I understand it, Oxford and Cambridge have shorter terms. They used to be 8 weeks, whereas most other universities, and I went to Redbrook University, were 10 weeks. So knocking 1 week out of it has a different impact. And there tend not to be classes in week 1 as well. I think it also, and I only studied English literature, but it also depends on the type of degree you're doing. If you're doing a science degree and you're in a lab all the time, a reading week means something very different. I think the other point, which is, in the first year university, life can be tough, and it's probably tougher than 20 years ago, despite my baby face. I'm in my 40s, because for a lot of people, they'll be living away from home for the first time.
You always have been at uni anyway.
People often get sick in their first year, and I had a few health
Always
problems.
did anyway.
And I think the financial impact of going to university is much more painful than it was 20 years ago.
That I get. I do think yeah, absolutely. And tuition fees, I think, are an absolute disgrace in terms of social mobility. I think it's outrageous now that only the rich kids primarily get to go to university. But none of those things you've just cited, apart from the money, are new. So what's wrong with this?
But reading weeks aren't new either. That's my point.
But they've never needed it at Cambridge. They've never needed it at Cambridge. They've always had those length of terms. So why now are they saying, I can't cope, my mental health is suffering?
Well, I don't know. I didn't go to university. Yeah, I mean, you have to ask Oxford and Cambridge what they do.
No, I'm asking you, Peter. You're here to... I'll give you 30 seconds to think about it while I talk to Jacqueline. Why now, Jacqueline? Can't this generation cope with the normal workload that has always been that way?
Well, I think they can if they were given the opportunity. And I just think that... I don't know what's happened to the... I don't know what's happened generally. I feel as though I'm living in a parallel universe. And so, OK, so you've got 8 weeks for term time. And, yes, you can use AI. Why should they be using AI? We've got some of the world's best universities in this country. We've got some of the top universities, along with America. I mean, if you look at Europe. Yeah. And... You know, the whole point of university is to challenge. It's to challenge the mind. And then we've got all of these other things going on where the students then are having to stick to a certain narrative. And if they want to challenge whatever, then they're going to get trigger warnings. If they're, you know, the tutors say, well, we've looked at these books and, you know, they're going to be having a sort of a breakdown or something if they read this, so we're going to have to change it. This is nonsense. Once you get to university, you're actually an adult. And the whole point of it is that it's a body of learning. And the learning is about challenging, and it's about looking at both sides of what is going on. And they're doing the students no favours.
So is it that the teachers then are frightened to put these kids under pressure, Peter? Whereas teachers in our generation... I did English literature and language like you did. Again, it was a while ago. But the teachers didn't mind putting us under pressure. They knew that if we were going to cope with life as an adult, we needed challenges. It's good for you.
Pressure in itself is not a bad thing, just like we all have a range of emotions and just, you know, like we all feel sadness and grief at times. So there will be pressure at university because there's always pressure in a job if you're lucky enough to have one. But I've got no great problem with reading weeks because people would often, you know, in your first year at university can be really tough as you acclimatise, a chance to go home and see the family. I don't buy this narrative more broadly that, you know, all kids are snowflakes and everything else. And again, what is life like as an 18-year-old student now? Well, I'd imagine it doesn't have the luxuries I had, because I'd imagine a lot of people are doing their degree while having to work part-time as well. So they don't have the...
Well, why shouldn't they work part-time?
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of the kids going through universities in the States do 2 jobs. Obviously, there's a section of children who've probably got very wealthy parents.
Well, they're all crippled with debt in the US,
but they
aren't they?
expect to. But if we're looking now at... You mentioned, obviously, you know, the $9,000 a year. I mean, there was you know, very few people went to university, and the state could afford to fund all of the... certainly when I was growing up. And Tony Blair, to be fair, the Labour government said we want, you know, half the kids to go to uni. Well, the state couldn't afford to sustain that. Where I have a beef is from COVID, and it really started with COVID, and everybody, there were no tutorials, and then the lectures were online, and this has carried over. Yeah. And I think that the students at our universities are still being sold short.
I agree.
I think the students are not getting enough tutorial time. They're not getting enough face-to-face. And so, you know, if these universities, and they're taking a load of revenue in from the foreign students and everybody else, and if they want to stay onto the level that they wish to be, they need to start giving back to the students and doing the job that they're supposed to do.
We've come to the end of the show. Jacqueline, great to meet you. Peter, lovely to see you again. Right, thank you, everybody. Up next, of course, Richard Tyson for Nigel Farage, but he's also in the building.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello there, I'm Greg Dewhurst and welcome to your latest GB News forecast. Turning chilly for a time this evening, but then mild air spreads back in overnight as cloud and rain moves in from the Atlantic. This weather front pushes southeastwards as we head through tonight and into Thursday, and then a north-south split into the weekend. High pressure keeping it dry in the south. This evening turning quite chilly, some frost out there, but overnight we see cloud and rain moving in from the Atlantic. This slowly pushing its way southeastward, so temperatures rising as the night goes on, taking us into Thursday morning. Most places frost-free, generally between 2 and 8 Celsius. But it does mean a cloudy, damp start for many, particularly across England and Wales, where we do have outbreaks of rain slowly pushing southeastwards. Brighter Northern Ireland and Scotland with blustery showers in the far north. And then through the day, the cloud and the rain slowly pushes southeastwards, becoming confined to the far southeast for the afternoon. Most places becoming dry and bright, plenty of sunny spells. Still some blustery showers across Scotland. Temperatures near average for the time of year, 7 to 11 Celsius, maybe just slightly above for some western parts. On Friday itself, some mist and fog and frost to start the morning, and then plenty of dry weather across England and Wales. Variable amounts of cloud. Cloudy skies, though, for Northern Ireland, Scotland. The risk of some rain as we move through the day here, and a mild day for everyone. Into the weekend, it generally stays quite cloudy, and temperatures remain above average for the time of year. See you soon.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.